Hey there. Rosie, Yellow Rosie put something up not too long ago, and I didn't listen to all of it because I stopped because um, other things come to me, like Michelle Martin, my partner that I work with, okay, across the pond, arcs, space arcs. And so I wanted to make sure that I got that in as a comment to Yellow Rose's most recent comment because I love everything that she did because I was supposed to experience her exactly the time I was supposed to because of who I know that I am, right? So as you know, it's impossible for me to qualify everything in alphanumerical formatting, which represents a torsion field movie player, because you're mapping and recording what you're experiencing at the opening and closing of circuits so fast, it's ridiculous. So you can't compress and, for me, spit out all the information that's associated with somebody say, yeah, but you forgot to say this, yeah, but you forgot to say this, because it's all connected. When you think of a massive library that's circulating holographic information, which is mathematical codes, that represent the software that's all connected with everybody, that's a lot. Okay, so you can think of this maybe as lines of communication, breaking through the lines of communication, because anybody that's been in any war knows that one side, which represents, in this case, one mirror going to war against another mirror. Okay, so you start with command and control, right? And what is command and control? Intelligence, communication. You take down somebody's communication platform and they're blind. Now they're what we call running blind. Okay, so that means the head of the snake, if you will, can't communicate with all of its troops. Now all of its troops are running around like a chicken with its head cut off. It doesn't know where it's getting its orders. Why? Because the hive's been cut off, the head of the hive. The queen or the king, the head's gone. So you take out the head, right? Decapitate it. That'd be the branch, father of the branch. Okay. So how would that work, Rosie? Well, it's real simple, okay? If there was a particular seed that you knew represented a universe killer, and you wanted to make sure, because love is the law, that we're done with all this evil stuff, what would you do? So it was very correct when she said that atoms will naturally seek balance because atoms are self-aware. So when enough atoms come together on behalf of Adam, which is an enormous amount of fire, to get rid of what they really begin to realize needs to be discarded because of the amount of energy that it's consuming, because we're giving it all away and it's choosing the biggest vampire. So when you think of it simply in energy terms, when she talked about heaven doesn't think like the mind does down here, that's only because of the density at which you operate down here. Because the speed at which things happen, when you understand the purest of energy, which is the purest of spirit, which is the purest of fire, which is the purest of light, which is the purest of love, that you experience through your heart and your soul. When you experience being what that is, as I am, when I came in here and I was a small child, then I realized the enormity and the amount of density that actually had to be cut through if I was going to heal every single cell that has ever suffered a loss of one fractal of light that went dark, to become an alternate state of consciousness that no longer experiences what I am, which is what love is, goes on forever. That's a mathematician. That's the source from which it all comes, is experiencing a loss of itself in its own mirror. So if I'm losing a loss in you as a result of what I experienced through you, because I have a connection to you, Rosie, and I'm experiencing your pain, okay, then I'm experiencing the pain in you and me. So the only way that I can restore me is to restore you. Otherwise, you're gone, lost in space. A part of what was once being loved, which is me loving you, has been gone fractal. That's a virus. That's an infection. Okay? Because love does no harm. So if at any point, at any time, from the beginning of creation, from an infinite love vibration, that state of awareness that is experiencing what love is gone forever, ever experienced anything less than what that is, then it lost a part of what it's given love to. That's the simplicity of it. Because now you know the other. There's the one and then there's the other. And how are you going to know one from the other, Rosie? unless you know what you are, which is what love is. Now you're with the one. Now you know what branch you're with. So you know it began with the one. That's why it's a law of spheres. That's why it's a law of least effort. Okay. You know, I mean, I could have told you this stuff when I was 4 years old to everybody, and I was trying to do it. But I realized when you're on a spiritual battlefield, you got to modulate your frequency in order to make it through as you're navigating through this horror field. So when I began realizing you're like an investigator, you're like a father who's come in to look at the casualties, how much we've lost of our branch. Okay? So you would understand, and I've said this many, many times, I'm not going to know when I sit before a council what my children went through if I'm not willing to go in there and experience everything they experienced. That's not a warrior, that's not a heart warrior, and that's not a real father. And that's not a real mother. They're joined as one. Okay? Because we don't leave a soul, we don't leave a spirit on a spiritual battlefield. So in other words, we don't leave our children on the battlefield. So that's one of the reasons why it's sort of translated when I was experiencing it as a child, right? See what I'm doing like this all the time? These are the waves. You know, the loss and the gain, the loss and the gain, the loss and the gain, the loss and the gain between energy takers and energy givers, accumulators. So when you know that you're a source of energy from which it all comes because it began with love, then you know it began with you. It began with me. Those are love engines. Those are love connections. So you know from whence you were born. Born in heaven. You were born out of what love is. So when you were born out of what love is, and you have never lost that connection because you still experience that, and you still have a connection to what I am, which is what love is. Now we're still connected with each other. Now we know the one. So for you to be able to make it out the other side where your spirit woke you up because you still got light and a fragment of soul left in you that is experiencing what love is through your own mirror, which is the spirit that is guiding your soul, then that means that your spirit was protecting your soul by the way that you navigated your way through a vampiric energy zone, trying to follow the spirit and use the soul's food. So this was not a beginner's course, particularly when you throw in all the tech, the AI stuff, energy binder systems, implants. The list is long, right? So that's why I knew as a child, checking all those boxes, because you're measuring all the crimes, because anything less than what we are, we can experience it because we have the key code. The master key code, which is the key that opens every door. Okay? Which means you're free to go. You earn the pass key. It's built in. That makes it relatively easy to know because you feel it in your heart and soul, how much love you have. So we know that love is what heals us. So we know that we're connected with all the other spirits that are in that light, that are there, that are with us to protect us and share that love with us, knowing we're on a battlefield. Okay. So that's why I've always suggested along the way that there are different ways, because I realized, because I experienced this when I was a child. My goal was to heal Gaia. Because if we can get her vibration up, then everybody's going to experience what she is through the ley lines. And those will be going the other direction, which means we'll be cutting off all their tunnels, all of their entry and exit points from which they feed on us and her. And raise it up out of negative magnetic space, which raises the perception, which raises the energy, accelerates the electrons. Now we're experiencing more voltage. The bioplasma is moving at a higher spiral speed. Now we're accelerating the rate at which we realize we're climbing. Bringing it up, get 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 it up. And that's what a monopole does. Because it means that you can precisely measure the exact center point of a gyrodome. That's the gift of being a polarity integrator, being a monopole. which is one. That's one pole. Otherwise known as a mated chip. So that means mated chip space arcs. So that's an enormous amount of energy. So when we talk about death, it's one thing for this to expire, expiration date, but what we're really talking about is spiritual death. Okay? That's when your mirror goes black mirror. It would be no different because I've certainly explained this in the past, okay? Because I worked with a girl. Her name was Misha Falme. She's O negative. When she told me her whole story, or most of her trauma-based story, okay? I realized because I was experiencing in her what we read because we can read the DNA, okay? We can read the history. We can read their history of how much trauma is held in cellular memory that goes all the way back to the first record of that branch. That's a lot. Okay. How much time and how much energy you got to burn all that off? The purest of light, which is the purest of love. So when I was experiencing how much trauma this young woman had experienced from the time that she was a small child, as a matter of fact, I think she said she was about 2.5 years of age when she was sodomized and raped by one of her own family members. Okay? So you realize all the compartmentalization of all the alphanumerical formatting of everything that's held in RAM, which is her entire record, that she is associated with to all those that represent codes that she's had a connection with and has been influenced by as a result of wherever she happens to be at that moment in time. So what you can read is what's feeding on her. As she mentioned to me one time, my spirit is bent. I have another layer of cold black rock over my heart every day. That's painful. Because now I'm experiencing what she's experiencing in me. Everything that she's lost as a result thereof. So in order for me to restore what I am, which is the one, okay, I have to restore her back to the one, or I'm not what I say I am. You see how that works, Rosie? Otherwise, what I say I am isn't what I really am. Now I don't know the one from the other. So I know they're not what I am because they're not experiencing what I am. So in order for them to experience what I am, which goes on forever, then they would have to experience what I am. Otherwise, they're the other. But they're in my mirror. And my mirror is what love is. That's the illusion part. That's a trap. That's a consciousness trap. Is to get you to believe that that's an illusion, that it doesn't really exist, and yet you're experiencing it. So you know that it exists because it exists in your mirror. So you're realizing you're experiencing something in your mirror that went dark. So if you want to restore you, you restore it. Otherwise, you're still experiencing what it is. So now we get into the idea of, we're going to abandon one of our children. We're going to abandon somebody who was born into the all creation. Because it is that abandonment issue, whether it's a dog, a cat, a horse, the spirit of a bird, that gets left on a spiritual battlefield because there wasn't anybody there to pick them up and heal them with love. And the one would never do that. Otherwise, the one is not what we think it is. So if the one is what love is, it goes on forever, then the one gives love to everything forever. That means healing everything that ever suffered a fracture that no longer experiences the one. So this is sort of how I've described how this sort of works, because of a contract or an agreement that I went into with her, which was, you're not ever going to lose me, because everything that I'm allowing you to experience from me, which goes on forever, means that everything that I am will never be lost. Which means you'll never be lost either, because what you experience by meeting me goes on forever. So therefore, you have experienced forever. So she has experienced what forever is, because she experienced the eternal love that I was giving her unconditionally, which is why the tears flowed like crazy, releasing all that pain. That's how natural healing takes place, without technology, if you will, but simply through the purest of light, which is the purest of fire, which is that spirit, which is that soul. She's experiencing that energy through her own heart because we're connected. So now we get into what we call the accountability and the responsibility end of it. So this is where, remember what I said in another video about Mr. Smith and Neo? It's your fault, Neo. It began with you and you're the one. See? Now we're in the victim-victimizer software as a result of seeded races that have gone to war to fracture souls. Because they couldn't live in a state of peace. Their mind's energy is not in a state of peace with the one. So when they go to war against the one, they're going to war against their own energy in their own mirror. So there's only one way that ends up. For them. And not the one. So now we have to get into how we sort of sorted this out, Rosie. When you talked about middle ground, because I mentioned that on another video. Okay. If I come in here and I realize that the level of tech and what was done to them, it's like saying that they didn't know what hit them. So if I didn't know what hit my children, I'm not going to punish my children for what hit them, and they had no idea what was being done to them. That's not their fault. So now you got to go back in time, even though there is no time, to sort through the records, right? It's held in record within their cellular memory, everything that happened as a result of those that break the law. That's a big job. That's an enormous amount of crunching. But the beauty in that is that there isn't anywhere that we're not, because when you're eternity, anything that exists within eternity that is less than what eternity is a knowable thing. Unless it's been wiped and gone, which means it is uncreated. That means fire burned it up. Those codes, those experiences no longer exist, because what replaced it is what love is. Because the light and the purity of that light, which is what love is gone forever, replaced it. Which means it uncreated what was once created, or was what was once experienced in somebody that was using its consciousness or became aware of what trauma is. Now that trauma's gone. Otherwise, that's a fracture lost in space sometime, a fragment that hasn't been burned off or healed. With the amount of fire that we have through our heart that we have to give, because of how much love we have to give that goes on forever. So it's sort of quantified and qualitatively measured when you're walking in a triage zone. Three spheres, guys, logo. When you're coming in to essentially the mop-up crew to survey the damage. Okay? That's what it is. It's like being a survey team. Right? Surveying what happened. How would you ever prevent anything like this ever being experienced anywhere ever again throughout the all creation? That's a collective decision, isn't it? Have a good evening. Thank you, Rosie.